Last Saturday night, my wife, Emily, decided to surprise me with a birthday party. She wasn't exactly known for being good at keeping secrets, and surprises were usually not her forte. But, on this occasion, she pulled it off flawlessly. I had absolutely no idea what was coming. The house was packed with friends, co-workers, neighbors, and people I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just a casual gathering, either. This was an extravagant event, complete with upscale catering, a hired bartender, custom decorations, and everything you could imagine. She even had a cake made in the shape of a golf club because she knew I'd recently taken up golfing again. The whole night was filled with people, and everything seemed perfect. However, in hindsight, that should have been my first sign that something was off. Emily doesn't do perfect. She's messy, always late, and a little chaotic, which is part of what makes her so lovable. But this organized and seamless event, this wasn't the woman I'd known for the past 7 years. I brushed it off at the time, though, assuming maybe she was just going all out to celebrate my milestone. After all, turning 35 is no small deal, right? Throughout the evening, I kept receiving odd compliments from guests. They'd say things like, "Man, you're so lucky to have Emily," or "She really loves you." You can tell. The comments started to feel a bit strange, but I figured it was just because she had gone all out. Still, I noticed that she kept slipping away during the party. Every time I looked for her, she was off in a corner talking to someone, always with a big smile when she caught my eye, as if everything was fine. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Around 11 p.m., Emily stood up to give a toast. The whole room went quiet as everyone gathered around. She raised her glass and started saying some beautiful things about me, about us, and how much we'd been through together. Then, her tone shifted. "And there's one more thing I want to share with you all tonight," she said, her eyes scanning the room with a mischievous smile. "Something really special. Something I've been waiting for." The crowd leaned in, a mixture of curiosity and excitement hanging in the air. I felt a wave of nervousness. Maybe she had some elaborate birthday prank planned, or perhaps she was about to embarrass me with a sentimental speech. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have prepared for. She walked over to the front door, and for a moment, I thought she might be getting a gift or something. But instead, she opened the door, and in walked a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, muscular, and carried himself with a smug confidence that immediately put me on edge. Emily looked at him, then back at me, and said, "I think it's time we all met the other man in my life." The entire room went silent. People started exchanging uncomfortable glances, whispering to each other, and I just stood there, stunned, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't know how to react. My first thought was that this had to be some sick joke, but Emily's expression told me otherwise. "Mark," she said, motioning to the guy, "has been a big part of my life lately, and I thought, what better way to celebrate your birthday than for all of us to finally be honest with each other?" In that moment, my stomach dropped. It felt like I had been hit by a truck, yet I hadn't even begun to feel the full weight of the impact. The room was completely still, with everyone waiting for my response. I locked eyes with Emily, desperately searching for any hint of explanation, any sign that this wasn't real. But she stood there, completely calm, as though this was something she had been planning for months. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened, trying to process the fact that my wife had just introduced me to some random guy in front of everyone, with a casual smile as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know if I was supposed to scream, laugh, or throw up. My hands clenched around the glass I was holding, my pulse racing, the sound of it pounding in my ears. I hadn't said a word yet because I honestly didn't know what to say. Mark, the man, stood there with an expression that was impossible to read. Emily raised an eyebrow, as if I were the one acting irrational. "I told you," she said with a shrug, almost nonchalantly. "I think it's time for some honesty. No more lies, no more secrets. Mark and I have been seeing each other for a while now, and I thought it was time for you to meet him." She let out a small laugh, as if this revelation was nothing more than a quirky confession. My brain was scrambling to catch up with her words. Seeing each other? I thought, what does that even mean? How long has this been going on? But no matter how hard I tried to process it, I couldn't understand. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had spent so many years with, had just introduced me to someone else in a way I could never have imagined. I was at a loss for words. Was this really happening? Or had I lost touch with reality? My eyes scanned the room, hoping someone would step in and put a stop to this madness. But instead, everyone remained frozen, too stunned to react. Some of my friends seemed to be shrinking into the walls, avoiding any attention. My brother, who had flown in from out of state just to celebrate with me, stood there with his mouth agape, staring at Emily like she had just sprouted another head. I looked back at her, still unable to process what was going on. "You're seeing him?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What are you talking about? You're married to me." Emily gave me a look of pity, like I was a child who didn't understand the simplest things. "I know, Brad. I'm not changing that. I still love you. This is just something else, something more. You need to understand. I didn't want to hurt you, but the lies weren't working anymore. So I thought, why not just be honest? We can work through this. It doesn't have to be a huge deal." Her words didn't make sense. She was acting like she had simply forgotten to tell me about a dinner reservation, not that she had been sneaking around behind my back with this guy. The air felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You thought this was the way to handle it? Throwing some messed up party to introduce this guy in front of all our friends and family? This is your idea of honesty?" Emily rolled her eyes as if I were being overly dramatic. "You're overreacting, Brad. I didn't parade him around. I'm just being upfront, finally. I'm tired of sneaking around, and I thought you, of all people, would appreciate the truth." My mind was spinning. Anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to boil over. I turned toward Mark, who stood there with an expression that was almost smug, as if waiting for some kind of recognition. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. "How long have you two been doing this?" Mark didn't flinch. He locked eyes with me and casually answered, "About 6 months, give or take." 6 months. I don't even remember when I dropped the glass, but the sharp sound of it shattering on the floor barely registered. My vision blurred with rage, pain, and confusion. It felt like the entire room was watching, waiting to see how I would respond next. I stepped closer to Emily, my voice a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You planned this, didn't you? This whole party? You planned all of this just to humiliate me?" Emily sighed, rubbing her temple like she was the one having the worst night of her life. "Brad, it's not like that. I wanted this to be a fresh start for all of us. I thought if we could just get everything out in the open, we could move forward. It's not that I don't love you anymore. I cut her off. "Stop. Just stop." I was done listening to her excuses, done with her treating this like it was some small misunderstanding. A wave of anger and hurt surged through me, stronger than anything I had ever felt. "You threw a party to turn me into a joke? Is that it? You wanted everyone to see you make a fool of me?" Her eyes flashed with annoyance, as if I were the one who wasn't getting it. "I'm not making you a fool, Brad. This is about being honest. I still want us to be together. Mark is just part of the equation now." I couldn't handle it anymore. I turned and stormed out of the room, the whispers and gasps following me like a distant hum. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, listening to her twisted reasoning any longer. All I knew was that my world had just shattered, and Emily stood there in the wreckage, acting as if she had no regrets. I stumbled outside, the cool night air hitting my skin, but it barely registered. My mind raced, trying to process everything. Mark is just part of the equation now. Her words kept echoing in my mind. That single sentence tore through me in a way I hadn't even known was possible. The woman I had built my life with, the one I had trusted completely, had not only cheated on me but had the audacity to celebrate it, to treat it like some bold new chapter in our relationship. I heard the door behind me open, followed by hurried footsteps. For a moment, I thought it might be Emily, but then I realized, of course not. She wouldn't be chasing after me. Why would she? Instead, it was my brother, Kyle. "Brad, wait up," he called, catching up to me. His voice was full of shock, as if he was just as blindsided as I was. He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. "What the heck just happened in there? What did she mean? She's been seeing this guy?" I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding, struggling to find the words. My throat was tight, and my chest felt like it was being squeezed. 6 months. I finally managed, my voice hoarse. 6 months, Kyle? She had been seeing him for 6 months, right under my nose. And apparently, she didn't think it was a big deal. When I confronted him, he looked at me as though I was speaking a foreign language. "She's completely lost it," he muttered, walking back and forth, clearly in shock. What on earth was that stunt inside? Who does something like that? Who throws a party just to announce they're sleeping with someone else, in front of everyone? Damn, Brad, this is... This is insane. And that didn't even begin to describe it. My entire world had been shattered right there in front of all my friends, my family, my coworkers. Everyone had witnessed Emily publicly humiliate me, and she didn't even seem to care. No remorse, no guilt, just a cold, indifferent attitude as if it was all part of some twisted plan she had carefully crafted. I clenched my fists, the anger rising again. But this time, it was different. The fury wasn't just aimed at Emily. I was furious at myself, too. How had I not seen this coming? How had I missed the signs? Were there any signs to notice? Kyle was standing beside me, his hands firmly placed on his hips, shaking his head. "You've got to do something, man," he said. "You can't just let this slide." I turned to him, my voice trembling as I spoke. "I don't even know where to begin, Kyle. I don't even know who the hell I'm married to anymore." Before Kyle could respond, the door to the house opened once more, and Emily walked out, looking as casual and unaffected as ever. She didn't even seem upset, just irritated that I had walked away from the party. "Brad, can we talk?" she asked, her tone as nonchalant as if we were discussing something trivial, like deciding what takeout to order. Kyle shot her a glare, stepping in front of me as if to shield me. "Talk," he repeated, disbelief in his voice. "You're asking to talk after what you just did? You threw a bomb into his life in front of everyone. Emily, you didn't talk inside, you performed." Emily sighed, casually pushing a strand of hair behind her ear, as if this whole mess were just a minor inconvenience. "I didn't mean for it to go down like this. I thought if we just put everything on the table, we could handle it like adults. I don't understand why everyone is being so dramatic." "Dramatic?" I snapped, finally feeling my voice gain strength. "You invite some guy you've been sleeping with for 6 months into our home, introduce him like it's nothing, and then you call me dramatic? Are you out of your mind?" Her face hardened as she crossed her arms. "I didn't invite him to rub it in your face, Brad. I did it because I'm tired of lying. I didn't want to sneak around anymore, okay?" I interrupted her, my anger boiling over. "So you thought what? That throwing a party and parading your affair in front of everyone would solve things? You thought that would make it easier for me to accept? Easier for you, maybe, but for me." I took a step closer, my voice rising as I pointed toward the house, where I could still hear the party continuing without us. "Do you have any idea how humiliated I feel right now? How disrespected?" Emily folded her arms tighter, clearly growing frustrated. "I knew you'd react like this. I tried to make it as painless as possible, but of course, you're blowing this all out of proportion." I stared at her, stunned by her arrogance. "Painless," I whispered, feeling the weight of her words sink in. She actually thought that blindsiding me in front of our friends was her idea of being considerate? That this was her version of honesty? Kyle, who had remained quiet up until now, finally snapped. "Emily, what is wrong with you? You think cheating for 6 months and then dropping it on him at his own birthday party is painless? You're completely delusional." Emily shot him a cold stare. "This doesn't concern you, Kyle. Stay out of it." "Oh, it concerns me now," he growled, stepping closer. "You just ruined my brother's life. You don't get to act like this is no big deal." But Emily didn't flinch. She just looked at me as if I was the unreasonable one, like I was the one with the problem for not accepting her version of reality. And that's when it hit me. The woman I had married, the one I thought I knew, wasn't standing before me anymore. This person, making excuses, brushing off my pain, treating me like an obstacle in her twisted plan, was unrecognizable. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment crushing me. "Why?" I asked, my voice wavering. "Why him? Why now? Why this circus?" For the first time, Emily seemed a bit uncomfortable. She looked away for a brief moment before speaking. "Brad, I just needed something else. Mark gives me things you don't. Excitement. Passion. It's not that I don't love you anymore, it's just that things changed. I changed. And I thought, maybe, we could make this work, all of us. I didn't want to hurt you, but I also didn't want to let go of this new part of my life. I thought maybe you'd understand, eventually." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "Understand? You threw a party to celebrate my humiliation. Emily, I don't think I'll ever understand that." We stood there, the three of us, standing in the cold, harsh reality of what had just happened. In that moment, it hit me, there was no going back. This couldn't be fixed. Emily had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. For the first time that evening, I finally knew exactly what needed to be done. The silence that hung between us was thick and heavy, filling the cool night air. For a brief moment, I could only hear the muffled sounds of the party still going on inside. It felt like a dream. People continued laughing, drinking, and eating, as if nothing had changed. as if my entire world hadn't just collapsed in front of them. I stood there, staring at Emily, the woman I once thought I'd spend forever with, and realized that the image I had of her, the person I believed I knew, was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to back down. This was the real Emily, and there was no remorse in her eyes for the pain she had caused. Kyle was still pacing, his frustration barely under control. He shot me a look, like he was ready to confront her again, but I shook my head. It wasn't worth it. She wasn't worth it. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in my chest. "I'm done," I said quietly, barely above a whisper, but the words cut through the tension like a sharp blade. Emily blinked, her confusion finally breaking through. "What do you mean, done?" I locked eyes with her, and for the first time, I felt an unexpected sense of calm, the kind that comes when you finally let go of something that's been slowly destroying you. "I mean, I'm done with this. Done with you. Done with whatever game you've been playing. You made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine." Her expression shifted from confusion to something more calculating. "Brad, you don't have to make it so dramatic. We can talk this out. I told you, I don't want to end things. I just want to add to what we have. Add to what we have." Her words echoed in my mind, and I felt my stomach churn with disgust. She was acting as if our marriage was just a project, something that could be rearranged according to her new desires. I shook my head. "No, you don't get it. You can't have both. You can't expect me to stand here and accept this while you're with another man. What the hell did you think was going to happen tonight? Did you think I'd just smile and go along with it? Did you really think I'd be fine with sharing my wife with a guy you've been seeing behind my back for 6 months? Emily's face hardened again, her defenses snapping into place. "I wasn't sneaking around, Brad. I was figuring things out." "You thought," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You thought you could just rewrite the rules without telling me? Without even having the decency to talk to me first? No, Emily. You don't get to figure things out after you've broken every promise you made to me. You don't get to blindside me at a party you threw under the false pretense of celebrating my birthday, only to rub your affair in my face." She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "You're being unreasonable. People do this all the time, Brad. You're just too stuck in your old-fashioned ways to see it. Relationships evolve. People evolve." Cal couldn't take it anymore. "Are you seriously doing this right now? You're not evolving. You're messing around with another guy and trying to justify it like it's some enlightened choice. You've lost your mind, Emily." But she ignored him. Her focus remained on me, her tone cold and dismissive. "This doesn't have to be the end, Brad. You're making a bigger deal out of it than it really is. If you just be open to something different, we could still have a future together. An even better one." The audacity of her words left me momentarily speechless. She actually believed she could manipulate me into accepting this, into embracing it. But the truth was, Emily had already destroyed any future we could have had the moment she chose to bring another man into our lives without my knowledge, without my consent. There was no going back. I took another deep breath, feeling the weight of finality settle in. "No, Emily," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "There's no future for us. Not anymore. You made sure of that when you decided to betray me. You planned this entire night to humiliate me, thinking I'd be too weak or too stunned to stand up for myself. Well, here's the truth you seem so fond of. I'm done. I don't want to be with you anymore. I don't want to know you anymore. You've turned this marriage into a joke, and I refuse to be the punchline." Her eyes flickered with something, anger, maybe, or fear, but before she could respond, I turned and began walking away, leaving her standing in the cold. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I saw her face again, I might lose the little control I still had. "Brad, wait," she called after me, her voice now sharp and demanding. "You're not being rational. We can work through this." But I kept walking, leaving her behind without a second glance. I could feel Kyle just behind me, his footsteps mirroring mine. Emily's voice grew louder, more frantic with each passing second. But I couldn't bring myself to listen anymore. I was done with her lies, done with her manipulation, and utterly exhausted by her complete disrespect for me, for our marriage, and for everything we had built together. As I reached the street, I stopped and turned to face Kyle. "I need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't stay in that house. Not with her." Kyle nodded. "You're coming with me. There's no way I'm leaving you on your own after everything that just happened." We started walking toward his car, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of Emily's betrayal still pressed heavily on my chest, but at least I was moving away from the wreckage. As we reached the car, I heard her voice again, but this time it had changed. It was colder, sharper, like she'd given up on pleading and replaced it with anger. "Fine, Brad," she shouted from the porch, her voice ringing through the street. "If you want to leave, then go. But don't come crawling back when you realize you're the one who threw everything away." I froze, my hand gripping the car door. Slowly, I turned to face her for the last time. She stood there, arms crossed, her expression as hard as stone. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered everything she had done, everything she had planned. She had twisted everything to make me out to be the villain in her distorted little fantasy. "I won't be coming back, Emily," I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "You made sure of that." Without saying another word, I slid into the car. Cal started the engine, and we drove away, away from the house, away from the party, away from the disaster that had been my life. As the distance between us grew, a strange clarity began to settle in. It was like a fog had lifted from my mind. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: I was done being Emily's pawn. This was my life, and I was taking it back. The ride to Kyle's place was silent, but not the peaceful kind. It felt thick, suffocating, like the air just before a storm. My mind was racing, but I also felt strangely numb, disconnected. I stared out the window as the streetlights blurred past, trying to process everything that had just happened. Trying to come to terms with the fact that my wife had orchestrated the ultimate betrayal right in front of me. And then, as if it was no big deal, she had the nerve to make it my fault for not accepting it. Kyle hadn't spoken since we left, but I could feel his eyes glancing over at me occasionally, making sure I wasn't about to lose it. The truth was, I didn't know what I was feeling. It was as if I was watching myself from a distance, detached from the chaos, trying to understand the wreckage. But there was no sense to be made of it. It was all just chaos. Finally, Kyle broke the silence. "You want to talk about it?" he asked quietly, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, like he was trying to hold back a wave of frustration. I exhaled shakily, not sure if I was ready to speak yet. "I don't even know what there is to say, man," I replied, my voice hoarse. "She's been cheating on me for 6 months, and tonight, she just threw it in my face like it was nothing. Like she was doing me a favor by being honest." The word felt bitter in my mouth. There had been nothing honest about what Emily had done. Kyle's jaw clenched. "That wasn't honesty, Brad. That was her trying to justify being a complete." He paused, glancing at me. "Sorry, but you know what I mean. She's trying to spin this like she's the reasonable one, and you're just too old-fashioned, or whatever else she's calling it. It's all nonsense. She crossed a line, and now she's trying to make you think you're the one being irrational." I leaned back against the headrest and sighed. "Yeah, I know. But it doesn't make it hurt any less, does it?" Kyle didn't have an answer, and I didn't expect him to. There was no easy solution, no quick fix to make the pain go away. It felt like I'd been hit by a tidal wave, and I was still struggling to stay afloat. We pulled into Kyle's driveway, the engine purring to a stop. It had been a while since I'd been here. The place was small but cozy, a typical bachelor pad, with a worn-out couch and a TV mounted on the wall that seemed to be hanging on for dear life. As we walked in, Kyle motioned for me to sit on the couch while he grabbed 2 beers from the fridge. He handed one to me, and I cracked it open, taking a long swig without even tasting it. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the TV flickering in the background, its muted light the only source of movement in the room. My mind kept replaying everything from the night over and over, like some twisted loop I couldn't escape. I can confirm that I'm ready to start the rephrasing based on your guidelines. Here's the revised text. The party, Mark's self-satisfied grin, Emily's icy indifference, and the stunned expressions on my friends' and family's faces as they watched everything unfold. I hesitated for a moment before asking, Do you think she ever really loved me? Or was it just an act all along?" Kyle paused, taking a sip of his beer as he pondered my question. "I think she did," he finally said. "I know I wasn't always there, but from the outside, you two seemed happy for a long time. Something changed along the way, though. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was both of you. I can't say for sure. But what she's doing now, that's not love. At least not the kind you deserve." I stared at the bottle in my hand, nodding silently. She kept talking about evolving, like she was on some higher plane of existence while I was stuck in the past. But if this is what evolving looks like, cheating, lying, disrespecting someone you're supposed to care about, then forget it. I'll stay stuck. Kyle chuckled darkly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah, man. If that's her idea of evolving, she can evolve her way out of your life." We fell into silence again, the weight of everything settling around us. The anger I'd felt earlier was still there, but it was now mixed with a deep, profound sadness. Not just for the marriage I thought I had, but for the person Emily had become. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize, someone who thought it was okay to throw a party just to shatter my world in front of everyone we knew. After a while, Kyle cleared his throat. "So, what's your plan? Are you going to talk to her again? Maybe try to work things out?" The thought of facing Emily again, of being in the same room as her, made me feel physically sick. "No," I said firmly. "There's nothing to work out. She made her choice, and I'm making mine. I'm not going to play her game. I'm not going to be her second choice, or whatever it is she thinks I am. I'm calling a lawyer first thing Monday and starting the process. I'll pack my things tomorrow. I don't care what happens to the house. I just need to get out." Kyle nodded, his expression serious. "Good. That's the right move. You can stay here as long as you need to, man. I mean it." "Thanks, Kyle," I said, feeling the weight of his support. He'd always had my back, but this was beyond what I could have ever expected. "I'll need it," I continued. "I don't know where else to go." "You don't need to go anywhere," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out." I nodded, a strange sense of exhaustion and relief washing over me. It was as if the decision had cleared a path in my mind, something solid to hold onto amidst the chaos. I didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was clear: it wouldn't include Emily. The night wore on as we stayed up talking. Kyle did his best to keep my mind off things, telling me some ridiculous stories from work, talking about sports, anything to keep the mood light. But despite his efforts, my thoughts kept drifting back to her, to the surreal horror of what she had done. Around 2 a.m., Kyle leaned back in his chair, breaking the silence. "You know," he said, "you should probably block her number, or at least mute her for a while. She's going to try to get in your head. You know that, right?" He was right. Emily wasn't finished with me. She'd think I'd cooled down, that I'd see things her way, that I'd evolved too. She'd try to sweet-talk me, spin some web of manipulation until I didn't know which way was up. She had always been good at that, making me doubt myself, making me think I was the unreasonable one. But not this time. I pulled out my phone and stared at her contact for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the block button. For 7 years, this woman had been my partner, my confidant, my love. But now, she was just a stranger with a knife behind her back. With one final breath, I pressed block. And just like that, Emily was gone from my life. Or at least, she would be. The next morning, I woke up on Kyle's couch, my neck stiff and my head pounding. My back ached from the awkward position I had slept in. But I couldn't complain. It was better than waking up next to Emily in that house, pretending everything was fine, pretending that my life hadn't just been reduced to rubble. The reality of the previous night hit me the moment I opened my eyes. Part of me had hoped it had all been a nightmare, a twisted, vivid dream that would fade once I woke up. But no, this was real. My wife had thrown a party to celebrate my humiliation, to introduce me to the man who had been sneaking into my life for the past 6 months. I stared at the ceiling, the dull ache of betrayal sinking deeper into my bones. Every time I replayed the scene from the night before, it felt like some grotesque movie playing on loop in my head. The way Emily had smiled, the smug look on Mark's face, the unbearable stillness in the room as everyone watched my world fall apart, and Emily's cold, dismissive words. I could tell by the way she expected me to just nod along, clap politely, and welcome this guy into my life as if he were an old friend, rather than the man who had been in my wife's bed. I sat up, rubbing my face with both hands, trying to shake off the heaviness of it all. The apartment was quiet. The early morning light was creeping through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. Kyle had already left for work, but not before leaving me a note on the coffee table. "Take your time. Stay as long as you need. We'll handle this one step at a time. I'm here for you." I folded the note, tucking it in my pocket. I needed that reminder that there was someone on my side. After everything that had happened, I had no idea what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in this suspended state forever. I had to face reality. The next step? Going back to the house. The thought of it made my stomach turn, but there was no way around it. My things were still there. My life, or what was left of it, was still there. I needed to start gathering my belongings, distancing myself from that place, from her. The idea of walking into the house and seeing the aftermath of the party made my heart race with dread. But I couldn't put it off forever. By midday, I found myself standing in front of the front door. It felt strange to unlock it, as if I were an intruder in my own home. The air inside was heavy and stale, like the remnants of the night still clung to the walls. I half expected to see Mark lounging on the couch, feet up, acting like he belonged, or for Emily to walk in with that emotionless expression, as though what had happened was just another day at the office. The living room was a mess. Empty beer bottles, plates of half-eaten food, crumpled napkins, evidence of the chaos from the party scattered everywhere. The decorations still hung from the ceiling, mocking me with their bright, cheery colors. Balloons that said Happy 35th, Brad floated in the air, now deflated, much like I felt. The irony of it all struck me with the force of a slap. She had orchestrated everything, the party, the details, all while knowing she was about to introduce me to her lover. She had planned all of this while preparing to destroy our marriage. I wandered through the house in a daze, my steps automatic. Every part of the house now felt tainted. The kitchen, once a place where Emily and I cooked together, laughing over glasses of wine, now felt foreign. The living room, where we'd snuggled on the couch watching shows, seemed like a distant memory. And our bedroom, God, I couldn't even bring myself to step in there. It felt wrong, tainted, knowing she'd shared it with him. She'd probably even brought him into this house when I wasn't around. Maybe even into that bed. I paused in the hallway, leaning against the wall, trying to breathe through the nausea that surged up. I thought I was ready for this, but standing in the place we had built together made everything so much worse. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything I hadn't known. I had to get out. I needed to leave this house, but first, I had to grab a few things, clothes, the essentials, anything I could take with me to survive the next few days. The rest could be dealt with later, through a lawyer. But right now, I just needed to leave. I made my way to the bedroom, forcing myself to open the door. It was eerily quiet, untouched since the night before, but it felt wrong. This wasn't my room anymore. The bed was too perfectly made, hiding secrets beneath its pristine white sheets. I avoided looking at it for too long, heading straight for the closet. As I pulled a suitcase from the top shelf, I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, listening. I recognized that sound instantly. It was Emily. She entered the room as though nothing had changed, as if it were just another lazy Sunday afternoon and not the morning after the most devastating night of my life. She didn't seem surprised to see me. If anything, she looked almost relieved. "Oh, good. You're here," she said, her voice casual, as though we were about to discuss the weather. "We need to talk." I couldn't believe the audacity. I couldn't believe she was acting as if we were about to have a normal conversation after everything. After Mark. After the party. After she had humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. I dropped the suitcase onto the bed, my hands forming fists by my sides. "I don't have anything to say to you, Emily," I said, my voice cold as I turned away from her. "I'm just here to grab my stuff. Then I'm gone." She sighed, walking further into the room, arms crossed over her chest, as though she were about to lecture me. "Brad, come on. You can't just leave like this. I know last night was hard, but we need to talk about it. We need to figure out how we're going to move forward." I finally looked at her. Really looked at her. I stood there, feeling a strange numbness wash over me, as if all emotions had drained from my body. There was no love, no anger, only an empty void. "There's nothing left for us, Emily. You ruined everything. You did this. Not me." She rolled her eyes, as if I were the one being difficult, as if I were the one at fault here. "You're not even trying, Brad. You're just running from change because you're afraid of it. We can still fix this. I know we can. You just need to open your mind," she insisted. My jaw clenched, and I could feel the last bit of self-control I had slipping away. "Open my mind?" I shot back, disbelief thick in my voice. "You're really saying that after what you did? You threw a party, my birthday party, to introduce me to your affair. You think I need to open my mind to that? What is wrong with you?" Her expression stiffened, the kind of look that told me she wasn't accustomed to me pushing back. Usually, I just let her steamroll over me until I gave in, but not this time. Not anymore. "I didn't do this to hurt you, Brad," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I'm being honest with you. I'm trying to show you that relationships can evolve. We don't have to stick to some outdated version of what a marriage should look like. This doesn't have to be the end. We can still have something, me, you, and Mark. We can find a new way to be together." That was it. Something inside me snapped. "No, Emily," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "We can't have anything anymore. You made that choice the moment you brought him into this. The moment you decided I wasn't enough. I'm not going to stand here and let you make me feel like the crazy one. You don't get to change the rules and expect me to follow them. This marriage? It's over." Her eyes widened, and for just a moment, I saw something shift, a flicker of panic, maybe even realization. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by that same cold detachment. "You're really going to throw away 7 years over this?" she asked, her voice soft yet laced with venom. "You're making a huge mistake, Brad. You'll regret this, you'll see." I shook my head, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. "No, Emily. The only mistake I made was trusting you." Without another word, I grabbed my suitcase and pushed past her, walking out of the room, out of the house, out of the life we had built together. This time, I wasn't looking back. This time, I was free. The door slammed behind me with a resounding thud, its echo ringing through the hallway like the final punctuation on the sentence that had been my marriage. I stood for a moment on the front porch, suitcase in hand, just staring at the street. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling from the rush of adrenaline. I had finally done it. I had walked away. But the relief I expected to feel, the freedom I had imagined, wasn't there. All I felt was a heavy, hollow emptiness. The world around me kept moving as though nothing had changed. A couple jogged past, casually chatting about something insignificant. A delivery truck parked a few houses down, and the driver unloaded a package. Everything seemed so normal, so unaffected. How could the world keep turning so calmly when my entire world had been shattered? I couldn't go back to Kyle's yet. I needed space, time to think. Without a clear plan or even a destination, I got into my car, tossed the suitcase into the back seat, and drove off. The radio was off, and the silence felt almost suffocating. I didn't want to hear anything that might remind me of Emily, of US, of the life I thought we had. Instead, I let the silence settle around me, my focus solely on the road. Each turn felt automatic, like my body was on autopilot. After driving aimlessly for more than an hour, I realized I had ended up at the park. Our park. I pulled into the small parking lot, the one we used to visit on Sunday mornings. We'd grab coffee from the cafe down the road and take long walks here, talking about everything and nothing. Back then, it felt like we were in sync, like we shared the same life. I would look over at her, laughing with her eyes full of life, and I'd feel a deep sense of belonging, of contentment. But now, standing here, looking at the trees swaying in the breeze, I couldn't reconcile that version of Emily with the woman I had just left behind. The woman who had stood in front of me and suggested we open our minds, while casually destroying everything we had built. I sat down on a bench by the small pond, watching the ducks drift lazily across the water. I tried to gather my thoughts, tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. When did I lose her? Had it happened gradually, like a slow leak in a boat that eventually sinks it? Had I missed the signs that something had shifted inside her? I kept wondering how I hadn't seen it coming, how everything had fallen apart without me realizing it until it was too late. I sat there, lost in thought, wondering if she had always been like this, hiding behind the mask of a loving wife, waiting for the perfect moment to show her true self. But no matter how hard I tried to search for a clue in our past, I realized it no longer mattered. Whether she had changed or had always been pretending, the result was the same. Emily had made her choice. She had picked Mark, created some idealized version of a life where she could have everything, where she could break me down and still expect me to stick around, acting as if nothing had happened. That wasn't going to be my reality. I wasn't going to be part of her game. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. It was Emily. I hadn't blocked her yet, and part of me resented myself for not doing so. But maybe I needed to hear her out one last time. Maybe she would try to manipulate me again, and I could finally close that door for good. Taking a deep breath, I opened the message. It was brief, cold, exactly what I expected. Emily, if you leave, don't expect to come back. I hope you realize what you're walking away from. The nerve of her. Even now, she was trying to twist everything, trying to frame me as the one destroying our life together. But she was the one who had thrown it all away. She had lit the match, and I was just watching the flames burn out. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, wondering if I should reply. Should I let her know how deeply she had hurt me? Should I tell her how much she had broken me? Or would that just give her more power over me, more control, more of my energy? I decided against it, closing the message and slipping my phone back into my pocket. I had to remind myself again of the truth. She wasn't the person I had once believed her to be, and I wasn't going to waste any more of myself on her. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves around me. I stayed there, lost in my thoughts, for what seemed like hours. The numbness settled in deeper, and I couldn't help but wonder what would come next. I had a meeting with a lawyer set for Monday, and Kyle had already offered me a place to stay for as long as I needed. But beyond that, the future was an empty canvas. There were no plans, no direction, just a vast, open nothingness. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the blank slate was exactly what I needed, a fresh start. I didn't have a choice. Emily had made sure of that. As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, I stood up from the bench and headed toward the car. It was time to face the reality of what lay ahead. But as I opened the car door, another thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. The house. I couldn't avoid it forever. Eventually, I would have to return, not to live there, but to deal with it, to sell it, to divide it, or whatever the divorce lawyers did when they tore your life apart. It wasn't just a house. It was the place we had built together, the place where we had made a home. Now, it felt like a tomb, filled with memories that had soured overnight. But I had to go back. I needed my things. I needed closure. Or maybe just something to make it real. I didn't go there immediately. I wasn't ready to face it yet. Instead, I went back to Kyle's place, walking in just as he got home from work. He took one look at me, saw the exhaustion in my eyes, and didn't ask any questions. He simply handed me a beer, sat down next to me on the couch, and turned on the game without saying a word. It was exactly what I needed, a distraction, just for a few hours. A way to keep myself from spiraling. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Emily wasn't out of my life yet. Not entirely. There were still things to figure out. The house, the finances, the possessions we had shared. All the messy, painful details that came with untangling a life from someone who had betrayed you. But for now, I let myself have this moment of peace, sitting there on that worn-out couch, sipping a cold beer with my brother. Soon enough, I'd have to face it all. The house, the wreckage, the inevitable final confrontation with the woman who had once been my wife. But for tonight, I allowed myself to just breathe. The storm would return, but when it did, I'd be ready. The morning came far too soon, and I knew I could no longer delay the inevitable. I had to go back to the house. The thought of walking through that door again, knowing what had happened, knowing what Emily had done, made my skin crawl. But I couldn't keep running from it. There were things I needed to take. Clothes, important documents, whatever dignity I had left. And I had to face it, one last time. Stand in the ruins of what used to be my life and accept that it was over. Kyle offered to come with me, but I told him no. This was something I had to do on my own. He didn't press me, just gave me a nod, as though he understood exactly what that meant. I appreciated that. I had always considered Kyle my anchor through everything I faced. But some challenges are ones a man has to confront alone. Walking back into that house? That was one of those moments. So, I drove. The more distance I covered, the heavier the air became, almost suffocating me. By the time I reached our street, it felt like I was carrying cinder blocks on my chest, weighing me down and making it hard to catch my breath. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles turning pale. This had once been our neighborhood, our home, but now it felt more like enemy territory. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine but remained in the car. I sat there for a moment, staring at the house, lost in thought. The blinds were drawn, and everything appeared eerily still, as though the house itself understood what had happened and was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first move. Finally, I forced myself to get out, grabbing the duffel bag from the passenger seat. Walking up to the front door, memories from that dreadful night overwhelmed me. The party, the cake, Emily's smile before everything came crashing down. I quickly shook off those thoughts. There was no point in dwelling on the past. What's done is done. The key slid easily into the lock, and the door creaked open, revealing the cold, silent darkness of the house. I stepped inside, half expecting Emily to be there, waiting with some new form of manipulation. But the house was empty, silent, and chilling. I exhaled, not realizing how much I had been holding my breath, and took a few steps further in, closing the door behind me. The living room was still a disaster from the party. Empty cups and plates were scattered across the floor, and the decorations were a sad sight, deflated, abandoned. The birthday banner sagged, as though it too had given up. I ignored it, heading straight to the bedroom. I didn't want to linger. I didn't want to let the weight of everything hit me all at once. I just needed to grab my things and leave. But as soon as I entered the bedroom, I froze. There she was, Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked up when I walked in, her face a mixture of exhaustion and something I couldn't quite place. She didn't look surprised to see me. She'd been waiting, and whether that was better or worse, I couldn't tell. Part of me had hoped she would be gone, so I could avoid this final confrontation, but another part of me knew it was inevitable. Of course she'd be here. "Brad," she said quietly, standing up. Her voice was soft, like she was trying to be gentle, but I wasn't falling for that anymore. I knew her games. I didn't respond immediately. I walked past her, heading for the closet. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of starting this conversation on her terms. I opened the closet door, grabbed a few shirts, and tossed them into the bag. It felt almost ridiculous, but I figured that if I kept moving, kept packing, I wouldn't have to confront her. I could pretend she wasn't even there. But Emily wasn't going to let that happen. "Brad," she called again, a little louder this time. "We need to talk." I stopped, my hand still holding a shirt, and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to keep my anger in check. I wasn't in the mood for her excuses, her justifications, or her twisted version of reality. But I knew this moment had arrived, and as much as I hated it, I had to face it. "We've already talked, Emily," I replied, still not facing her. "There's nothing left to say. I'm here to get my things and leave. That's it." She sighed, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "You're being so stubborn. You won't even give me a chance to explain. You're just running away." "Explain?" I chuckled bitterly, turning around to face her. "You already explained everything when you introduced Mark at my birthday party. What more is there to say? Emily, you cheated, you lied, and then you had the nerve to rub it in my face in front of everyone we know. No, I don't need an explanation. I need to get out of here." Her face hardened, her jaw tightening in anger. She didn't like that I wasn't playing along with her version of events. She wasn't used to me standing up for myself, and that clearly frustrated her. But I didn't care. Not anymore. "I didn't throw it in your face," she snapped, her calm exterior cracking. "I was being honest, Brad. I told you the truth. You always said you wanted honesty, and that's what I gave you. I didn't want to keep sneaking around. I wanted to be open about what's been going on." I shook my head in disgust. "You think that's honesty? You think throwing a party to announce your affair is honesty? No, Emily. That's cruelty. You didn't want to be honest. You wanted to make a spectacle of it. You wanted to show off how enlightened you are, while treating me like I was some fool who should be grateful that you even bothered to share." My voice grew louder as anger built up inside me, years of frustration and betrayal surfacing all at once. "You weren't truthful with me," I said, my voice steady but tinged with frustration. "You manipulated me. For months, you lied, and then you tried to change the rules to fit your own needs. You didn't care about how I felt. All you cared about was getting what you wanted." Emily crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes at me. "You're acting like I did this to hurt you, Brad. That wasn't my intention. I've changed. I needed more, and I thought, more." I cut her off, my hands trembling with anger. "You didn't need more, Emily. You wanted more. And instead of being honest about it, instead of coming to me as a partner, you went behind my back. Then, when I didn't just accept it, you made me out to be the villain. You treated me like I was in the way of your happiness." She flinched at my words, but the icy expression in her eyes didn't fade. "Maybe I wouldn't have had to go behind your back if you weren't so set in your ways. You're so rigid, Brad. So predictable. You never took risks. You never stepped outside the lines. I needed more than that." I let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "So now this is my fault? You're blaming me for your affair? For your lies? Jesus, Emily. You really don't see it, do you? You don't understand what you've done." She stood there in silence, arms still crossed, her posture defensive. And in that moment, I realized there was nothing left to say. There was no fixing this. Emily had made her choice long before I ever understood what was going on. No amount of explaining or pleading could change that. I turned away from her, stuffing the last of my belongings into a duffel bag. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of continuing this argument. I was done, completely done. As I zipped up the bag and threw it over my shoulder, Emily stepped toward me. Brad, wait, she said softly. I didn't turn around. What? I asked, my voice flat. You're really just leaving? She asked, her voice almost pleading. I exhaled slowly, turning to face her one final time. Yes, Emily. I'm leaving. You've made it clear I don't have a place in your life anymore. Her face flickered with a brief expression of uncertainty. She looked like she was about to say something, some last-ditch attempt to save what was left of us. But she stopped herself, swallowing whatever words she had meant to say. The moment passed. Fine, she said quietly. Go. I didn't need to hear anything more. Without saying another word, I walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and out the front door. The air outside was sharp and cold, but it felt like the first real breath of freedom I had taken in days. As I made my way to my car, I felt the weight of everything start to lift, little by little. I wasn't completely free yet. There were still legal battles to face, a divorce to go through, but emotionally, I had severed the ties. I had walked away, and this time, I wasn't turning back. I threw the duffel bag into the passenger seat and climbed into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I took a final glance at the house, the place I used to think was home. Now, as the engine rumbled to life, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house that once meant everything to me. But now it was just a shell, a hollow space, a tomb for the life I thought I had, filled with the remnants of a love that had crumbled the moment Emily decided I wasn't enough. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just a place where betrayal lived. I shifted the car into reverse and slowly backed out of the driveway, not once taking my eyes off the front door. It was the same door I had walked through so many times, never imagining it would be for the last time. A part of me wanted to feel something, sadness, regret, anything. But all I felt was a deep, cold emptiness. I had spent months, maybe even years, clinging to something that had slipped away without me even noticing. As I drove down the street, the house disappeared from view, fading like the final scene of a movie. It was over, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. There were no more unanswered questions, no more trying to fix what had already been shattered. Emily's choices had already written the ending to our story, and all I could do now was close the book and move forward. But moving forward wasn't as simple as just walking away. Where did I go from here? My entire life had been built around her for so long. Every choice, every plan, every moment had been intertwined with the life we had shared. Now that was gone, ripped away in the most painful way imaginable. I was free, yes, but freedom felt hollow, like a void. I drove for a while, aimlessly, as my thoughts swirled in the silence of the car. What was next? What did I do when everything I had relied on, everything I believed in, was taken from me? I had Kyle, sure. I could crash at his place for a while, but beyond that, I didn't have a plan. The future stretched out before me like a dark, empty road, and I had no idea where it would lead. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cafe near the park. The park Emily and I used to visit every Sunday. I hadn't planned to stop there, but somehow, I ended up there anyway. My hands seemed to turn the steering wheel on their own, as if my body was operating purely on instinct, drawn toward a place full of memories of us, of better times. I parked the car and stepped inside the cafe, ordering a coffee simply to have something to do. The barista flashed a warm smile, but I barely took notice. I felt like I was in a haze, disconnected from everything around me. Taking my cup, I walked over to the window and sat down, gazing out at the park. Couples strolled hand in hand, children laughed and played on the swings, and families spread blankets for picnics. Life moved forward, uncaring of the storm that had torn through my own. I remained seated for what seemed like hours, just staring out at a world that kept turning while I felt stuck, unable to move. My thoughts kept drifting back to Emily, remembering the way she looked at me, her expression filled with cold indifference. She twisted everything, trying to convince me that I was at fault for not being understanding enough to accept her betrayal. But the truth was clear. I wasn't the one to blame. She was. She had betrayed me, and no amount of reasoning or manipulation could change that. For the first time in a long while, I understood that none of this was my fault. That realization, though bitter, gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known in ages. As the day wore on, the cafe grew busier, and I realized I couldn't stay there forever, sinking deeper into my thoughts. I needed to do something, anything, to break free from the downward spiral. I stood up, grabbed my coffee, and walked out, crossing the street toward the park. I wandered along the familiar path Emily and I used to walk together, but this time, it felt different. I wasn't there to relive memories. I was there to distance myself from them, to claim the space as my own once again. As I strolled, my mind wandered to the future, what would come next. On Monday, I had a meeting with the divorce lawyer, and there would be a lot to sort out: finances, the house, who would get what. The thought of it all made my head ache, but it was a necessary step. I needed to separate my life completely from Emily's, and beyond that, I had no clear idea. I sat on a bench by the pond, sipping my coffee while ducks lazily glided across the water. The stillness of the park brought a sense of comfort, reminding me that life would go on, even if I had no clue what mine would look like from here. I wasn't tied to Emily anymore. I wasn't tied to that house or the life we'd shared. I was free, unmoored. It scared me, sure, but it also felt liberating. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow over the pond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat. I froze, but when I checked, it wasn't Emily. It was Kyle. His message read, "Kyle, you good? Need me to pick you up or something?" I smiled to myself, grateful for the one constant in my life right now. I replied, "I'm good. Just needed some air. I'll head back soon." I tucked the phone away and felt a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time since everything had unfolded, I no longer felt like I was drowning. I wasn't okay, not yet, but I could see a faint path ahead, and that was enough for now. I stood up, casting one last glance at the park, before heading back to my car. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was done letting Emily control my life. I was done letting her dictate how I felt, what I believed, and who I was. As I drove back to Kyle's, the sun was setting, painting the sky with brilliant hues of red, orange, purple, and blue. It felt like the end of one chapter, but also the start of something new. Something uncertain, yes, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As I turned onto the highway, leaving the park and the memories behind, I allowed myself to imagine a future without her, one that was fully mine, unburdened by betrayal and lies. And for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a spark of hope.